Hey guys, today is an awesome episode. Today's guest is Austin Chandler from Illinois. He is part of the Working Class Bowhunter podcast crew, and he is a big buck killing machine. Welcome to the Fall Podcast. I am your host, Aaron Blasey, and today's guest is Austin Chandler, like I said before, and this is a great episode. We cover a lot of different stuff as far as Austin's approach. So Austin's approach to October hunting, he's a farmer, that's his day-to-day job, so he doesn't get a lot of time to hunt in October, but we do cover how he approaches the fall every year, how he approaches October, and then how he approaches November. We talk about, calling sequences and what he does with calls. Oh, what else? We talk about just being persistent, and his philosophy is the more time you can be on stand, the better. The more you're successful. You always hear the old adage, you can't kill him from the couch. Well, we get into that a little bit here, so it's a really cool episode. Austin Chandler is a solid guy. If you've been living on a rock, and I say this in the podcast, but if you don't know anything about if you don't know anything about the Working Class Bowhunter podcast, you need to go check that out because he's on a lot of those episodes. He's really good friends with those guys, and he's part of that podcast. And you can hear a lot of his stories on there. And a matter of fact, we get into two stories this podcast about this last fall. He switched over to trad. He still has a compound, but this year he's like, I'm going to take the plunge. And he killed two really good deer, and we get into that and kind of how everything, he'll even tell you, was kind of a shit show, and then it just happened for him. So it was a really cool ender to this podcast, but a lot of cool information in this one. So I encourage you guys to listen to the whole thing because Austin's a really good dude and just a lot of cool content. So I guess with that being said, I'm going to kick it over to this interview with Austin, and thank you guys for listening. All right, welcome back to the Fall Podcast, and today I've got a guest on that I've been wanting to have on for a very long time. I feel like I know this guy personally just because I listen to so much Working Class Bowhunter, and he's on there a lot. So Austin Chandler, welcome to the podcast, man.
Hey, Aaron, what's going on, dude?
Nothing much, man. I appreciate you coming on and doing this. Like I said earlier, I feel like I've listened to so much of your stories on Working Class, and, I talked to Kurt, Geyer quite a bit, and he talks about how you do stuff on a very high level when it comes to whitetail, and I've been wanting to get you on for a while now, and finally we've been able to make it happen, so I'm excited about this one.
Yeah, it's cool to be on. I kind of missed one of your Instagram messages. I guess I get busy farming and hunting, and I must have overlooked the message, but it's cool to be on. And yeah, I was talking to you about this. It still kind of blows my mind that people know who I am, but the Working Class Bowhunter podcast has got a huge following, and it's just really cool to be a part of that whole team. Everybody on the team really flows together well, so we've been having a blast with that. Yep.
No, I agree, man. And if anybody out there has been living under a rock for the last 5 or 6 years, go over to Working Class Bowhunter and listen to their podcast stuff. It's awesome. I've listened to every one of the episodes and really enjoy, listening to you guys and really all the information you guys do and the stories. I love them. So
I appreciate it. We have a pretty diverse team and a pretty diverse podcast, but it seems to work. People seem to like it, so we're having fun with it.
For sure, man. Well, I got one question, and I told you before we were recording that I wasn't going to put you on the spot, but you know what? I just thought of this question, and I'm going to do it. Put
me on the spot.
And I might have missed this from the Working Class Bowhunter if you guys talked about it, but where does the nickname The Lord come from?
Kurt thought it would be a good idea to call me The Lord, and my wife hates it, so he's obviously using it more since my wife hates it. But he considers me a whitetail god, which I try to be humble, and it's flattering, but it's kind of like, all right, you guys are kind of building me up into something that I'm not, but it just became a whole joke on the podcast. So the Lord seems to have stuck.
I like it though. And I do like Kurt's thinking because like I said, you do things on a high level. And if anybody wants, any facts to that, go to your Instagram, Austin Chandler's Instagram, and look at the deer that he's been taking in the last, I don't know, 15, 20 years or whatever. It's second to none. You've got a knack for things, man.
Yeah, I get to spend a lot of time in the woods. I've been blessed to have been born where I ended up here, and I'm in the perfect location in God's country where there's big whitetails all around, and I get enough time to chase them. And when you kind of add in the right environment and a persistent attitude, things seem to fall together every fall for me. I'm sure it's not always going to be this way, but I'm just kind of riding that train as long as I can.
Yep, for sure. And so that kind of, with that persistent attitude, that kind of segues me into my first question. And, you are a very persistent guy. And the things that I gather and the things you and I've talked about is, your philosophy is the more stand time you can get, the more successful you are. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that? Like, I know it's pretty self-explanatory, but like when did you start picking up on that? As like, man, this is like what I need to be doing, Yeah,
I'll kind of start at the beginning. I started bow hunting, it would have been in 1997, and was fortunate enough my first year it was the first year I was in high school. My dad took me out to Utah, and I arrowed my first animal. It was a cow elk. I made a 50-yard shot on a cow elk the last day of the hunt. So got bit by the archery bug right off the bat, and the following year in 1998, I was able to arrow my first whitetail buck, and he ended up being a monster. He was he grossed almost 170 inches, and I wasn't really holding out for a deer like that. It just happened to be fate that a very large whitetail fell to me my first year of bow hunting, and because of that, I kind of got bit by the mature buck hunting right off the bat. So it's kind of a funny story. Most guys climb the ladder and start out with some younger deer, and it was kind of a different story for me. I started out with a big one, and I just thought, this is cool enough. I'm just going to keep doing this. So I never shot an immature deer. I just started with a good one and just kept rolling.
That makes a lot of sense. Because like you talking about everybody, climbing the ladder thing, that was me, climbing the ladder deal. I haven't killed any, as many giants as you have at all, honestly. My bucks, you look at mine, you're probably like, those are, they're good bucks, but they're, mediocre bucks compared to yours, which is fine. But, there's two different.
The one that sticks out in my head is that the one that you shot, it almost looks like an extra main beam, and then it's got some weird points coming off the back of it. That buck's just insane.
Yeah. And that's something we talked about when we walked up on him and we stopped filming, and it was just like, you just look at a deer like that and you're like, the cool thing about that is there's not one other deer out there that'll be like that, really. You know what I mean? It's like, there might be traits like that, but like that is just ridiculous how that side, one side grew. It was crazy. But
he's an awesome deer. That's what keeps me ticking, is just those abnormal whitetails running around. You never know what's going to be on the next trail camera or come around the draw the next time. That's what keeps me going out every year. But
for sure, man.
No, I shot that first buck, and it just kind of ignited a fire, and I kept rolling through. I was able to kill a couple of good ones in high school, and then killed another one after college. And it was right around, so I started in 98 on whitetail hunting, and it was around 2009 when I really started discovering that the more time I spent in the tree was directly related, kind of correlated to my success. The more hours I could spend, the more success I was finding. And in 2009, I was able to tag out on 2 good deer, and I just kind of committed to it there in 2009 that I was going to spend as much time as I could in the woods with them. And I think I've doubled every year since 2009.
Holy cow. That's unbelievable, man. So, when that kind of light bulb moment happened to you, now, do you have like a methodical approach to each October or each fall? Are you like, well, this is my basis. I'm going to start from a distance see if I can figure out what a deer is doing and then move in? Is that like your kind of 30,000 foot view approach every fall?
Well, I do take the same approach every year, and it is more kind of laid back and kind of more observation in October. It's not really due to the fact that I want to be conservative. It's just due to the fact that I am a farmer. So I have to spend a lot of time working in October. So it always seems I try to be done with my farm work by the end of October, so I can really kick back and enjoy the rut. And that's when I seem to have most of my success. But I can see a lot of value. I know a lot of big buck killers are very aggressive in November or in October. When they and I would agree, when you have a good bead on a buck, whether it be in a food source or on a scrape or wherever you seem to have found him in October, if you have a good bead on him and you're seeing him in the daylight, it's time to strike. You got to strike when the iron's hot, no matter what time of year it is. If you're seeing a buck in the daylight, it's time to make a move. But for me, it just never seems to pan out in October. I've only killed, my earliest deer is October 15th.
Okay.
And I've only killed, several deer in October, and most of them are right there in the last week. So, but no, it's not necessarily because I don't want to be aggressive in October. It's just due to the fact that I don't have a lot of time in October to hunt.
Right. Yeah, and I totally understand that. I mean, my brother-in-law is a farmer. He's not a hunter, but I just see how much work he puts in. They've got a dairy farm, so a dairy farm never sleeps. But on top of that, they do a whole bunch of custom cash cropping and harvesting and stuff like that. So it's like it never ends, man. And
Yep.
The amount of time that you put in for work is like, it's crazy. But on the flip side of that, are you guys like a cash crop farm or a dairy farm?
Yeah, we do row crops, so primarily corn with some soybeans, depending on what the markets are doing.
Okay.
We've been 50-50 before, but most of the time it's heavily corn.
Okay.
We live in an area with some diverse farm ground. We've got quite a bit of irrigation on some sand, and then we got some bluff ground, so we farm a little bit of everything.
I gotcha. Now, I guess my question to that is, like, are you farming a lot of the ground that you're hunting then?
Yes, yeah, and that's nice to be able to kind of farm and scout at the same time, and you get to see animals out of the tractor or combine, so it kind of you get to do some scouting out of the machines, which is kind of cool. But I've grew up in the same area my whole life. My great grandfather started us. My grandfather was a farmer. My dad's a farmer, and now me and my brother are kind of starting to take over. So we've just really fell in love with this area, not only because of the hunting, but the farming as well.
Right.
So
yep.
It just seems to work out really well for us.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting to. Like, have there ever been an instance when you're like harvesting corn or something like that, and you see a giant that you're going after, and you're like, well, shit, I got to get down. I got to shut the combine down, and I got to get in the timber. Has that ever happened?
I bumped a monster. It would have been prior to 2009 when I was talking about really getting into this, but I almost hit him with the corn snout. He waited right till I got up on him to get up, and it was a neighbor that ended up killing him in gun season several weeks later. He ended up going like 192.
Oh
so
my gosh.
He was something to see running around in the cornfield.
That's crazy. Now, I've always wondered too, like when you're harvesting corn or something like that, do a lot of the deer, everybody's like, oh, there's tons of deer in the corn and everything, which there probably are. But do those deer hold pretty tight, like when you're cutting the corn until like the last little bit and then they just like scatter? Like, how does that play out?
Yeah, I mean, they'll move back and forth between the standing corn and the timber, but when they really kind of come out of the woodworks right there at last light and the machines are still going in the field and they're just curious enough or they don't care, they'll come out and check the machines out so you kind of get a look, see what's in the field. It's pretty cool.
Yep, I got you. To kind of go back to October, are you, with your October approach, if you ever get opportunities to hunt in October, are you hunting any mornings in October? I know that's like a huge debate. Like a lot of guys say you can't hunt October mornings. A lot of guys say you can. Like where do you fall in that?
Yep. Well, I'm a conservative hunter. I try to kind of model my approach. I guess Bill Linke would be a good matchup to my style. I am conservative in October. I don't hunt a lot of mornings. Now, that being said, you just have to pay attention to the intel that you have. And if you've got a buck that's on a schedule in October in the mornings where you're seeing him in daylight, obviously it's time to make a move. But for the most part, I am more of an evening hunter. It's just easier for me to get in between them and the food and intercept and not take a chance of blowing deer out of my spots where I'm anticipating, doing some rut hunting for my big deer that I know that are on the farm.
Right. Yep. I totally get that for sure. And I'm kind of the same way. If I've got any sort of intel on a deer that's in daylight in October at any moment, I'm jumping in. I don't necessarily, just go in on a whim or just like throw a dart at the wall. But, with me and my work, I'm filming a ton of the fall. So it also, I got to play into the fact that like, how many times am I going to be able to sit with a bow in my hand, like, maybe throw a shot and just go in here where I know he's hanging out, where I think he's living, and hopefully I don't bust him. I have done that, so it's kind of got two things going against me there, but I totally get that. Because I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to the morning hunting in October. I shot, one of the bigger deer in Michigan that I've shot with a bow in the morning on the edge of a bean field. Like, it was the exact opposite of like what everybody tells you to do. Don't hunt field edges in pressured areas unless it's, security cover with corn and everything. This was a standing bean field, October 10th. It was the first cold front of the year, and it was the first day of the cold front, and this big 4-year-old walks out, and, I got an opportunity at him, and I'm like, I literally just did everything that nobody tells you, so it's like, it's kind of hard to look into a lot of different things when it's, situations can be different.
Yeah, well, when the stars align, I mean, if you've got a cold front coming in, like you said, I mean, the last couple of years, we've caught some nice cold fronts in October, and it's honestly been just as good as anything you see throughout the rut. If you catch that cold front right, the barometer's high, the moon phase, if everything's lining up and you can crawl into a spot without bumping deer, like I said, it's all situational. It all depends, and a lot of farms are different than other farms. I mean, if you can get in and out without alerting a lot of deer, then by all means, make your move when you need to. But just try to pay attention to that, I guess. And if you think you're going to cause more harm than good, and you're seeing flags come up in front of you when you're going in, it's probably not the best idea.
Right. To kind of further this point on this, let's hypothetically say, you're entering, a stand location in the morning, and you're going like maybe down a field edge or something like that. It could be a destination food source or something like that. But have you ever had the instance, and the reason why I ask is because I've had this like quite a bit, where I go out and you might hear deer running in front of you, or the thing is, like, all my instances with this is deer, like, when it's really dark. I get in when it's like really pitch dark. I know they can see good, in the dark, but all the times I've bumped deer like that, they'll run off a little ways and then they'll just kind of do their thing. Like, they don't ever blow out of the country. Have you ever had an instance like that where it's like, you see a trend like that? Like, deer don't just like start blowing and, they just kind of run off and they're like, oh, what's that? Because I try to get in early and under the cover of darkness and just kind of let things settle a little bit too sometimes. Have you seen a trend like that at all?
Well, I like to do both. So I'm either going in really early where I'm, and I do a lot of mobile hunting, so I bring my set with me a lot of the time. So I'll go up and be up in the tree kind of before it's breaking light. So I like to get in early, or I like to go in late when I can see pretty much everything that's going on. I've got some friends that have kind of got me onto this later approach to the stand, and you seem to bump fewer deer doing one of those two methods. I like both. I'll go in extremely early, or I'll go in late enough to where I don't need to be glassing as I'm going in. I can just kind of, see with my eyes what's going on, and I seem to bump less deer doing that.
More of that like gray light kind of time frame?
More like full light, yeah.
Oh,
like
okay.
an hour after first shooting light, like 45 minutes after first shooting light. everything's bright enough. If you see deer in front of you, you can kind of stop and analyze what's going on as you work your way into the stand.
Right. Now, is that more of like a November tactic for you, like kind of in the rut phases?
When the rut's on, I like to be in early. I like to be in before the deer are moving, because a lot of times you're going to catch that big boy cruising right at first light. So, but I mean, like I said, every farm is different. So as you learn your farms, you're going to know, okay, do I need to be in there that early, or does it make more sense to kind of wait and hold back and go in with my eyes, in the light? I guess if people are unfamiliar with this, just kind of experiment with it and try and see what works the best for you. But I found a lot of success and seem to bump less deer when I can use the light in a lot of situations.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know a couple buddies that do that as well, and are really successful with it. My thing is kind of a head game where it's like, well, if I'm getting in like when it's full light out, it's like it almost feels like I'm not hunting. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
I love that first
like
crack of day,
out.
birds are
Yep.
chirping, frost is on the ground, and like you hear that, like I love that, like, oh, that's going to happen right away. I love that feeling.
Yep. I know what you're saying, and it does seem like you're missing out the first few times you do it. But when I look back on all my hours on the stand, I look back at kind of when activity starts really picking up, and you do see some deer right at first light. That's kind of a hot time. But there's usually a gap, and it's usually about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes after I've been in the stand when I start seeing kind of an increase in activity. So,
I gotcha. Yep.
even though you might feel like you're missing out, sometimes you're not really missing that much by waiting and kind of going in with the light.
Yep. No, that makes total sense for sure. Now, to kind of like change gears a little bit on visualizing like a target buck in October, like if you see, let's say you're driving or scouting from the truck or something one night or during the day, and you see your target buck in daylight hours in October, let's call it middle of October, the quote unquote October lull or something. Are you diving in right away, like next day or that night? Like, are you going right now?
If the weather permits and I can't farm and I've got an opportunity to hunt in October and I see a big deer in the daylight, yeah, the following evening I will be making my move. Or if I think that I've got a really good bead on where that deer is bedding and I can intercept him coming in the morning, getting back to his bed, you could get aggressive, but I'd be on that food source the next night.
Yep.
And that's just the general rule of thumb that I've always followed. When, strike when the iron's hot. If you're seeing that deer do things in the daylight, don't wait, because they're wild animals. I mean, they can change their patterns, especially in October, very quickly.
For sure. I agree. Now, talking about a little bit of buck bedding, and, if you think you know where this deer is bedding, in your opinion, if you have an area where a buck is bedding, or you might even see this deer bedding there, like how, in your experiences and everything, like how often is this buck bedding in this area, if that makes sense?
I'm not following the question, Aaron.
So if you see, like, let's say you have this thicket that it's like, well, I know this is kind of my sanctuary, and you physically see a buck bedded in, this area, and you're like, man, I know where he's bedding. Like, how many times is that buck bedding there in your experiences? Like, is it something that he's going back to this area a lot, or is it like he's just going to bed kind of where he, feels safe?
Well, it's an extremely situational question. Every deer is different. Every farm is different. I've had those deer. Well, I've seen them bed in this area. I'll walk in, I'll pick their sheds up on that exact ridge, even in the same bed. Most of the time, if a deer feels secure on that farm, he's got certain beds that he's going to use with certain winds that allow him to access certain foods. And if it's working for him and he can either not get disturbed or he can sense danger before it gets to him, he's going to make it a habit to keep using that bed. And you've heard the DeQuistas probably talk about the bump and dump method, where they'll bump a big deer out of his bed and then come in and get in front of him and kill him coming into that exact bed. Just because you bump a deer doesn't necessarily mean that he's gone. If that bed does what it's supposed to and alerts him of danger, he likes that spot still, so he's probably going to come back and use it. Now, if he keeps getting repeatedly bumped out of it, he's going to change. But it's just hard to, it's hard to say if you see a buck one time that that's his bed that he's coming to. He might only bed there one time and then, move on through. I mean, you really just, it's just one of those things where you have to know your farm and know the deer to really say if that deer is making it a habit to bed in that spot.
Right. And you answered that perfectly, because that's exactly what I was looking to get out of it was, if you have these certain areas on your farm where you can identify that this buck feels safe, like he's going to bounce from those, one to the next to the next. You just got to figure out, like, with food sources and topography and everything, where to set up. Like, that's the perfect answer I was looking for, because in my opinion, like you said, I know it's very situational and everything. Like, the buck bed craze is like huge, but I think there's very situational things that, like, a buck might come back to that. Like, a lot of people think the bucks come back to that every day or every other day, which that could happen. But in my experience, it's been like, they're going to bed where they're going to bed, but they have to feel safe. That could be in woods A or woods B, or, it just depends. He will be back at some point. You just got to hope to be there.
Yeah, a lot of these big deer will access the same food source for days or weeks at a time, but they don't always access it from the same direction. A lot of these old deer like to kind of put the wind in their nose and approach it from a safe side. And if they've got one bed, it kind of makes it tough for them to kind of loop around and access. So they might have several beds to access the same field.
Yep.
So
for sure.
It's and I'm not a buck bed hunter. Like I've just never got into getting right on top of them and killing them in the bed. It sounds cool, and I take my hat off to the guys that do it. It's just never been a tactic for me. I'm just more conservative. I'd rather stay away from the bed, let them stay nice and cozy and secure, and then I get multiple opportunities to try to kind of make my move through the season on them as they're approaching food.
Yep. Yeah, those bed hunters that do that, it does sound really cool. Like, to be able to, like, get up in a stand, and when you get up there 40 yards away, you see tines, in like a marsh or something, and it's like, oh shit, he's there. Like, that is the coolest thing, but it takes things to another level.
Like, you're dialed to the map. You're dialed to the map. So
yes.
You can get in on one and watch him bed down or watch him get up. Like, that's when you know you're dialed in. I'm not saying that I'll never do it. I would like to try it, but it seems like with my conservative approach, it's just something that I've never really been able to do.
Yeah, and honestly, that seems like it takes a ton of time for scouting and, finding those beds, locating the ones that, are buck beds, like locating the right ones, and then, the wind and the thermals, like, you have to be on top of your shit from A to Z for everything to fall into place, I feel like.
Yep. Yeah, those guys that are doing it, the Andre de Clistos, man, they figured out stuff a long time ago that I still don't know. But
yeah.
There's more than one way. There's more than one way to skin a cat, I guess, and he's figured out a pretty cool way to do it.
Yep, that is for sure. I have a question as far as, like, do you have a favorite day or favorite set of days that you're like, this is the time I need to be in the woods, like, all the time, every year in and year out? This is the time frame.
The time frame from Halloween until the 15th of November is good, and specifically my dates that I seem to have luck on are from November 2nd through about the 7th or 8th.
Okay.
I would say more than half the deer on my wall have fell in that 5 or 6 day period.
Okay.
A lot of guys they like to target one specific deer and try to kill him in the season, and it's not always the best time to do that. I mean, sometimes you do get lucky and see him on his feet, but as far as predictability goes, October and December are probably better times to accomplish that goal. But I'm a sucker for random deer that just show up. I like the excitement of not knowing what's out there, and a lot of these deer on my wall are not deer that I was specifically targeting. It just happened to be that during the rut, they happened to come by me, and it might not be as methodical as a lot of these guys that are picking out one deer. I mean, I do that quite a bit, but half of my deer are just random rut deer that run by me, and I still find that style of hunting just really exciting.
It's cool to hear you say that, because I've had that instance here in Michigan where it's like, man, I have no idea who this deer is. And then you find out like the neighbor 2 miles away has been, seeing him all year. And it's like that.
Yep.
To me is so much information right there of like, you just never know how far a deer can travel in the rut and what doe might bring him by. I had a deer on one of my farms here. This was 3 years ago, and chasing him all summer, or seeing him all summer, chased him during the fall a little bit. Saw him one time, and I lost him for like 2 weeks. I'm like, where is he? Finally shows up on camera again, and he's got a crossbow bolt through basically his back straps. And
oh man,
yeah, and he showed up. I'm like, well, and this was in November, and I'm like, he showed up for like 2 days, and they weren't in daylight. It was all nighttime. One of my best friend's dads shot him opening day of gun season, November 15th, the night of the 15th, and he shot him just over 2 miles from my farm. And I'm like, holy cow, like, him and I have been hunting the same properties for how long now, and we never get the same deer. And then this deer just shows up 2 miles away. It's like, wow, that it's just crazy to me. And then you're figuring out, how does he get there? Does he use this timber and use this timber? It's like, that's a cool story in itself. I love that.
The magic of the rut, man. You got to love the rut. Even the people that don't like the rut still go out and hunt during that time, just because you never know when that absolute giant's going to come right under your stand.
100%, man.
My biggest archery whitetail was that exact scenario. I hadn't had a picture of that deer. Still can't place him from years of prior trail camera history, and just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And he came by, and I shot him and walked out to go get my family to help recover him, and snagged the SD card on the way out. And I did get a picture of him the night before I killed him. That was the first picture I'd ever had of him, and I ended up killing him the next day. But
that's crazy.
He was a monster, like a 188-inch double drop tine deer that I'd never seen before.
You and double drop tines, man. Like, don't you have a couple deer that double drops?
Yeah, I killed that big one with a bow in, what year was it? 2010, 2011. I killed him in 2011, and then I killed a deer that I call the hopper dropper. I killed him with a muzzle loader in, what was it, 2018, I believe.
That was a stud, man.
Yep, he's a really cool deer. Deer that I'd had history with for several years. Picked his antlers up the spring before, and was really able to piece together a bunch of cool information about that deer. But he had me pulling my hair out by the time I killed him. I didn't know if I was going to get it done or not.
With that deer, how much history did you have with him? Like, did you have any other encounters or anything?
That season that I killed him, I had 5 encounters with him. And I had him within 70 yards 3 different times with a bow, and just nothing would ever work out. He had a doe with him one time that busted me. He came by my shooting lane too early. One time I had my back to him and didn't see him come by. And then one time the neighbor had actually missed him, and he was trying to get into cover. I didn't realize the neighbor had missed him, but he came by me kind of fast, and he was 70 yards. I wouldn't have shot at him anyways, but just never seemed to come together with the bow. But I'm primarily a bow hunter, but I was still elated to kill him with the muzzle loader.
Yeah, it's a giant. Did you ever get him aged or anything?
So judging off of an antler that I found off of him in 2014, I think he was probably 5 years old in 2014.
Yep.
And I killed him in 18, so that puts him at 9.5 is
Wow.
my guess on him. Yeah.
That's crazy. And then you think about it, it's like, if you only had 2 years of history with that deer, is that what you had? Like, or no, you had since 14. So how many years of like pictures and stuff did you have of him?
We had pictures of him since 14.
Okay.
So we had 4 years, 5 seasons worth of pictures of him.
Well, even then, it's like, man, how many bow hunters has this guy been by? How many times has he been missed by a bow or a gun or,
Yep.
and how many, if you think he's 9, that's 9 ruts, like 9 years. Like my Iowa deer, he was aged at 7.5. I sent his teeth in to get, the cementing or whatever, the aging from deer age, and they came back at 7.5. And it just made me think, like, how many times has this guy been shaved, the back, his hair on his back been shaved off, or, how many other hunters are like, is this their number one buck that they're like going after? It's just that stuff I geek out on.
At 2 and 3 years old, how many times did he come really close to going in the back of somebody's truck? Those are,
exactly.
If they can make it past 4 years old, they probably got it made. But
yeah, and then it's like,
no, it's really cool.
Yeah, and it's like, I'm
go
sorry.
Ahead.
No, you're fine. You go ahead.
I was going to say, if anybody was interested in that Hopper Dropper episode, we did a full podcast on him with the Working Class Bowhunter podcast. I think it was like episode 260 or 261. But there's a link that's got a bunch of pictures and kind of shows the history we had with that deer and kind of how he morphed and changed through the years. And the podcast turned out really cool too. So if anybody's interested, they can check that out.
Yeah, it's an awesome episode. I remember when the pictures came up, I actually saw the pictures on Instagram first before, like right after you killed him. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what kind of deer is this? And then the episode dropped and I'm like, it was cool just to hear the whole story. But no, that's awesome.
I'm looking at him right now. I've got him. Yeah, I got him full body mounted up in my man cave. He's kind of jumping over a railing, kind of right towards the pool table. But he's a cool looking deer. He's got a really small frame, and all of his tines kind of tip in at the top. He's like 150-inch mainframe 10. But then he's got 39 inches of junk. He's got 2 matching drops that are like 9 inches each, and a bunch of burrs at his bases. He's just chocolate rack, just a really cool looking deer.
Jeez, man, that is cool, and that's what caught my eye is like how tight he is, like how narrow framed, and how chocolate racked he is. Obviously, his 2 drop tines are great too, but yep. You just don't see that chocolate rack a lot around, down here in the States.
Yep. Yeah, he's definitely the darkest rack deer I've ever killed. He stands out on the wall, that's for sure.
Yep, for sure. That's sweet. Well, to kind of get into, covered the October thing into November. I mean, what is your November approach? Now, by November every year, do you usually have like a deer that you've got a pretty good bead on, and like methodically like how you're going to attack it?
Well, and every farm's different, but the one farm where I seem to have a lot of my success, it seems that it could be as late as November before a big one will really get in there and kind of call it home. So I just try to be patient and kind of wait and see what piles into that farm. And it was the case this year. I ended up shooting a couple nice ones off that farm and then had the monster roll in, and he's still living there. So I'm looking forward to picking up his sheds. But every farm's different. This farm seems to hold deer from November on, and they winter on it. And then when the summer gets in, they kind of leave, and it's, late October, early November before they kind of start trickling back into it again.
Yep.
So my November approach is I try to kind of wait, hang back, and see what's going on. If I'm fortunate enough to tag out the first week in November, then that's great. If not, then my hopes are still high on that farm.
Okay. Now, when you're sitting back and waiting, obviously you're probably in stands that are like, well, you can still get it done, but you're just not pushing the envelope as much as you normally would. Is that kind of where your head's at with it?
Yeah. And the longer I hunt, the more I stay out of this farm. It's great whitetail habitat, but it's just so tough to get back into the heart of it without busting, 10 or 15 deer out. So the older I get, the more I just kind of hang back and hunt the fringes, and it seems to work. These big deer, they feel comfortable in there. It's just a sanctuary for them. Kind of keeps them out of the neighbor's lap as well. So I just let them get comfy back there and kind of leave them alone.
Okay. Yeah, and, with November and everything, obviously the rut comes, a lot of different tools you can use as far as calls and everything. Are you like a big caller? Like, do you use rattling antlers, grunters, all that stuff? Are you like a big vocalization? Do you like to get after it?
Call. Yep.
Okay. Now, are you more? Do you like the blind call?
We've got a lot of buddies that are. Well, I don't try to blind call. If I can hear deer, like, you know, obviously if you're hearing them, they're probably within 100, 150 yards of you. If I can hear a deer and I can't see him, there are times when I'll call at him, but to just randomly call, I don't usually do that. I've been busted more times than not. Have a big mature deer come in and, you know, try to get downwind of you. It's just doing what they do and get caught. So I try not to blind call a whole lot. Like this year, I never even brought rattling antlers with me. It's fun to do every now and then, but I haven't had a lot of success with rattling antlers. I've killed one good one, but I busted, 10 good ones doing it.
Right.
So, I've had a lot of success with a call. It's actually an old Mad call. Came out like in, I don't know, probably 07 or 08, called the Mad Buck Growl. And I still carry that thing with me today, and actually killed my second buck this season with it. But that call has claimed a lot of big deer for me. I'm confident in that call. Usually if a mature deer is by himself and it's the right time of year, he's probably going to come into that call.
Isn't that like the coolest feeling though, when you see a mature deer by himself and he's just kind of like cruising, and it's like, oh my gosh, like I've got him. If he's in the right mindset, I can get him over here. Isn't that like just a cool feeling?
Yep. If the wind's in your favor and he's, within 100, 150 yards and he's just kind of doing big buck things and there's no doe with him, there's a very good chance that a mature deer is going to respond to that call. And I know a lot of guys don't like to call. For me, I've just had enough success with it. I don't leave home without that call on my neck.
Yep. Yeah, and with me calling, especially, growing up in Michigan, I've done a lot of out-of-state hunting as well, but, it's all relative to what, I don't go here in Michigan and just start banging, rattling antlers together. And then the deer I killed in Iowa, I did, the first time I saw him, I blind rattled and he came in, but I knew my downwind side was a completely huge CRP field, so not to say that's a good thing to do, but I could see deer if they're going to be trying to get downwind of me. Like I had a good way to see them, so I knew they wouldn't try to get downwind. But like when I blind rattled and he came out of nowhere, I'm like, holy shit. Like, and I drew him out of a standing cornfield. I figured he came out of basically a cornfield. And that was my whole goal, was to like just see if I could drum something up, and he comes out of nowhere. But that's relative to Iowa and, Illinois and Kansas. You can do that kind of stuff and get away with it sometimes. Michigan, you can't. So, like...
Well, there's nothing more exciting than clicking the antlers together and seeing a big one come into it. It's pretty exhilarating.
Yeah, it really is. And that's, like, the approach I take in Michigan and out of state as well, is more the conservative approach when I'm calling. Like if I've got a mature deer, in the distance, and it's like, I always bring out the grunter first. Like a grunter here and even in Michigan has killed a lot of deer for me, and give them a couple soft, like little tending grunts. And just about every time the buck will come over and check it out and figure it out until he doesn't see what he wants to see. And then he's just like, well, I'm not sticking around here, but hopefully you got an arrow in him by then.
Right.
So
that's cool. It's a lot of fun to talk to him and communicate with him. I've been able to use that call, and then I've snort wheezed at a couple deer and snort wheezed some big ones in. So that's always fun because they're really pissed when they come in when you do that. And it's a lot of fun.
It definitely is. So I want to transition to this year. Now this year you had a goal to like kill a deer with your longbow, right? I mean, you've never killed a buck with your longbow, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. When I was in high school, I shot a recurve a little bit and, really enjoyed it, but I just never had the confidence to get out and try to hunt a buck with it. And I'd sat and stewed on this for years and just watched all these guys doing the traditional thing. And there's a handful of guys that are, having success with it every few years. And I guess I was just to a point in my whitetail hunting career where I felt like I could afford to take a season off and just kind of try it. And I bought one this summer and started practicing with it. And I thought, if I'm smart about my setups and I get within 10 to 15 yards of one, I've got a really good chance of putting an arrow through one. And was really excited to take it to the timber. And kind of struggled on some does, missed and wounded a couple does and was getting discouraged. And it finally came together. I shot a really nice doe in a food plot at 10 yards and just aced it, heart shot her, and watched her tip over. And it was just the craziest feeling ever. It'd been a long time coming. It was always something that I'd wanted to do, was kill a deer with traditional equipment. And once it happened, I was like, man, I'm not setting this thing down now. So it wasn't just a few days later I was able to harvest my first buck with it. It was pretty insane.
So walk us through that a little bit, that first buck. Obviously having a little bit of a confidence boost, killing that doe first, but going into that, I got a feeling like when you're walking into the woods, you have a different mindset, I would think. Like, I got to get a lot closer, and I got to make sure I'm on top of my shit. Is that kind of how you were thinking?
Well, the closeness doesn't really bother me because 90% of the deer on my wall are within 20 yards when I shoot them anyways. So the distance thing wasn't the limiting factor for me, or I didn't feel like it was going to be a limiting factor. The biggest thing for me was just shooting the bow well. I'm just not that good of a shot with it yet. So the more I shoot it, the better I get with it. And I'm changing some of my shooting styles to try to mold my own style to make something that works for me. And I'm getting better at it. But this first deer that came in, I actually got YouTube videos up through the Working Class Bowhunter podcast of both of these kills if you want to watch them. But the first deer came in and he gave me the shot that I wanted. It was 15, 17 yards, something like that. He was on a hot doe. Everything was perfect. And I shot high on him out of a tree stand. I'd really been struggling with shooting high on deer. And I shot him high, kind of up in the back straps, and he ran off and kind of waited a little bit. And this little buck was chasing his doe around, and they went to leave and kind of went away from me, and he was on the opposite side of me. And when they left, he came to kind of follow, and you could actually hear that deer grunt on that YouTube video. You can hear him grunt as he's coming by me with an arrow hole in him. And he gave me one shot at 31 yards, and I aced it. So
no way, man. That's
kind of
awesome.
Outside of my comfort. Yeah, it was a long bomb, but I took it anyways, and smoked him. And yeah, we gave him a few hours. It was kind of liver and lung, and gave him a few hours and recovered him. But it was, I would consider that the pinnacle of my bow hunting career when I was able to make that shot on that deer. It was just insane.
Dude, that's unbelievable. That's so cool. It's been something that, about 3 years ago, I was like so close to getting like a recurve. I was at the archery shop, like gonna buy it, talked myself out of it, and haven't picked it back up yet. And one of these years I'll do it. I just don't know if I'm to the point yet, but to hear you say that just gets like the hair stands on my back. Like I'm excited. Like that's so cool.
Yep. Every bow hunter needs one. I mean, whether you're bow fishing with it or just shooting rabbits or whatever, every bow hunter needs one just to kind of play with and just kind of dream about, man, what would it be like to take this to the tree with me? Yeah. And the first time you do it, it's like you're hooked on it.
Oh my gosh. So now, like 2 days later, you go back out and you were successful again, right?
I think it was probably 5 or 6 days later. I'm trying to remember the dates in my head. I think it was like I think it was like the 8th of November, and then I finished on like what would have been like the 13th or 14th, somewhere in there.
Okay, so was it within the same week though?
Top of my head here. Yeah, it was within a week. I think it was within a week. I killed the doe, the first buck, and the second buck. So
okay.
I went from really riding the struggle bus to having a lot of success in a week.
So what happened with the second buck then?
Well, I was in a spot, actually the same 160-acre farm, and I'd went around. I have to access it, cross a creek to get into the north side of it, and I had pre-hung a stand the day before. I put eyes on a good deer in there about a week before that, so I went in, hung a stand, got out, left it for a day or two, and then came back in. And it was, it was right around that time our rut was peaking. I'd say around the 13th is when our rut peaked here this year. And the deer got off his bed early. He was probably 150 to 200 yards, and I seen him cruising, and it was early enough. It was like, 3 o'clock when he got off the bed. So I just assumed that he'd probably just got off the bed and was kind of starting to do his thing. And he was coming towards me, and then he went to cut up a draw to go away from me, and I had that call with me, and I called at him, and he looked right at me, like right at my tree, and I knew at that minute, like he's coming to me. So I clicked the GoPro on, and he just put his head down and came right to me. Hopped a little creek and stopped at like 20 yards, and I missed him. He kind of froze after I shot and was kind of looking around. He could hear the grass move. He could hear the arrow hitting the grass after it went over him. And he kind of looked around. He's like, oh, well, must have just been a squirrel. And he actually came to me after I shot at him and walked up to 13 yards. And from prior experience of doing this already on deer that season, I'd had another arrow knocked because I knew he was probably going to stick around. And he gave me a shot at 13 yards and spined him on that one, and then finished him with an arrow after that. But
man,
he was a tank. He was like 146, a young deer, but just too good to pass with the longbow.
That's so cool, man. You are lucky getting 3 opportunities at this deer, or at least 2 opportunities.
I never dreamed it would be an advantage with a longbow, but that bow of mine is so quiet that if you miss and they don't totally blow out, you're probably gonna get another opportunity at them. I think it happened on 3 or 4 deer for me this season where I would shoot and miss, and they'd eventually just feed back by me again.
Wow, that's crazy. Now, what's your setup?
Yeah.
Like, what bow do you have? What arrows and broadheads and everything are you running?
Yeah, I'm shooting. It's a stalker stick bow. It's a Jackal FXT, so it's their long bow. I think it's 62 inches. 43 pounds at 28 inches is what I'm pulling with it. I'm shooting a Victory Carbon Traditional 450 arrow. It's like an inch from being full length, so it's a pretty long arrow. And then I'm shooting a VPA 3-blade, 175 grain head, and I'm shooting an 80 grain insert with it. So
Okay.
I got quite a bit of weight up front.
Yeah, you're throwing a Lincoln log out there then.
But yeah, especially for a 43-pound bow, it's definitely not designed to be a long-distance bow. I mean,
sure.
Honestly, that shot I made on that deer at 31 yards is really kind of pushing the envelope for that draw weight and that arrow. But it worked.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Now, what made you go with like a longbow opposed to like a recurve?
Well, I'd shot a recurve, and I was honestly more familiar with them. I just like the look of them more. You know, they do hold a little more stored energy in the limbs. They're just a little faster, but they're a little noisier, and they have a little more hand shock. And I saw this longbow, and it was a cool looking bow, and it was a good enough deal. I took a chance on it and just started shooting it and really fell in love with it. I have yet to shoot a recurve that feels as good in my hand as that longbow does. Now, I do have a buddy that's got a custom built ILF Uka limbs. It's sweet and it is smooth, but I still kind of prefer that, just the draw cycle and the feel of that longbow.
Yep.
But everybody's got their own personal preference on that. So.
Now, for anybody out there that might like want to know, maybe just getting into like traditional, like what would you recommend, now that you've taken it kind of through the first steps and the paces of this fall, like what would you recommend for that they do so they're like, don't get discouraged? Yeah.
Well, I guess the first step is get something that you're comfortable buying. If you're not sure that you're going to really take the dive, you can buy a nice bow to enter into the traditional game for under $200, brand new, and you can find used ones cheaper than that. So just buy something and get it and start playing with it. If you think you want to get serious into it, there's a book that I read. I think you can buy it through Lancaster. I think it's called Learning How to Shoot the Stick Bow or something like that. I can't remember the exact name of it, but it's a whole freaking novel on tuning and shooting styles and everything traditional. It's just a really good book. So once I got into it, I learned how to tune my bow and get the arrows flying the way that they should. And I'm still learning. I mean, I've only done this for 1 year. A lot of guys are looking to me for advice. I'm like, dude, I've been doing this for like 9 months. So
Yeah.
I don't know everything, but I'm trying to pick up on stuff.
Right. Yep. Now, I guess the question is, are you ever going to go back to a compound?
Well, I think I'm going to have to. This fall, we're going moose hunting in Alaska, and I don't know that I'm going to have the confidence to shoot an animal like that with traditional gear yet. Maybe 3 or 4 years down the road, maybe I'll bring it up, and I might bring it up with me this year. But
Yep.
Right now, I'm leaning pretty hard towards the Elite. I'm probably going to pack the Elite with me up there.
I got you. Very cool, man. Well, hey, I know we're getting up on time here. I can't thank you enough for coming on and doing this, and hopefully the experience was just as good as the working class bowhunter experience. I'm hoping.
Oh, it was a good time, man. I'm drinking water instead of whiskey, but other than that, it was a pretty good time.
Well, perfect, man. I appreciate it. If anybody out there wants to know more about you, obviously the working class bowhunter, but where send them to your IG channel. Where would they find you and everything if they want to see anything that you're doing?
My Instagram is Austin Chandler 1197, and like you said, you can find me on the Working Class Bowhunter podcast site, Facebook. You can look me up on Facebook. My Facebook is not as, I guess I don't have as many of my deer on that as I do on Instagram. On my Instagram, I tried to kind of do a chronological order of all my bucks that I've killed, so most of them are in there.
Awesome, man.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, man. It was a good time.
Yeah, no problem. We're gonna have to do this again, maybe when you get back from your moose hunt, because I'll be interested. Is this your first moose hunt?
It is. Yep.
It'll be one heck of an experience.
It's gonna be fun. Oh yeah, we're gonna be hunting for 10 days, and we're gonna be gone for 15. Taking a float plane, and they drop us off in an area where nobody's been. So it's gonna be extreme.
Yep, I can't wait to hear about that. We're gonna have to podcast about that. That'll be fun. So
for sure.
Well, cool, man. Thank you very much, and I'm gonna cut you loose here. And again, I appreciate it.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me on, and good luck this fall.
You too, man. Thank you. All right, there you have it. Another great episode. Austin Chandler, thank you very much for coming on and recording this podcast. I appreciate it, buddy. We're definitely going to do another one some other time. I feel like Austin's going to probably be a return guest on this quite a bit. He's just a solid guy, really knows his shit when it comes to whitetails, and he's just doing things on an elite level. It's an upper level, and he just does it so well. So yeah, I want you guys to go to iTunes, please, and leave a 5-star rating, leave a review. And I'm going to say it again. Go over to Working Class Bowhunter. Check out their podcast. It is an awesome podcast. I listen to it every week, every episode they bring out. They get out Doug and Kurt and Eric and Austin, and then Ross Biggard. Also, he's part of the crew, and I'm going to miss their whole crew, but I tend to get a lot of their guys on because they're just solid dudes and they know what they're doing. So appreciate you guys listening. Don't forget, we'll be back right here next week on the Fall Podcast. Thanks, guys.